Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first installment of our new webinar series, Emerging CCS Markets. In this first webinar, we will focus on the rise of CCS in Denmark. My name is Galoran Turan, and I'm the General Manager of Advocacy and Communications at the Global CCS Institute. We are an international think tank that aims to accelerate the deployment of carbon capture, use and storage as a key climate mitigation technology. Next, please. Today's session will include a Q&A session at the very end. You can submit your questions using the Q&A function at the bottom of the Zoom control panel, as you see at the sort of lower part of the screen. In the coming days, a recording of this webinar will be made available on our website. And we will also have the presentations, we'll feature the presentations from our speakers as well. Next, please. So why start the series with Denmark? So many great reasons. I think first, Denmark is probably one of the most progressive countries when it comes to trying to address the climate crisis. Denmark set its long-term goal of becoming climate neutral, or carbon neutral rather, society by 2050 back in 2011. So quite a long time before, dare I say it, it became fashionable to do so. The necessity was understood, long before the necessity was understood and adopted by countries and cities and elsewhere. Denmark has had intermediate goals of including 30% renewables in the total primary energy supply by 2020. And it actually reached this goal in 2016, 4 years early. And now it's targeting having 55% from renewables by 2030. The Danish climate agreement, which was approved by the parliament in June 2020, sets binding targets of a 70% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, and again, climate neutrality by 2050 at the latest. It's not just at the government level, but also at the kind of the city level. Copenhagen aims to be a carbon neutral city by 2025, and I believe if it achieves this, it will probably be the first city to do so. Secondly, once Denmark has also embraced CCS as one of its measures, as one of the key measures to tackle climate change, and once it's adopted it's moving at sort of really great speed, great momentum to deploy it. So I think Denmark is a great example where it's a leader in renewables, great success in energy efficiency, but it's also decided to employ carbon capture, use and storage. So it's very much of a kind of place where a strategy of and everything that we need to deploy in order to address climate change is being deployed. When we released our global status report in 2021 in October, we listed Denmark as one of the sort of new countries to enter the CCS landscape. The ARC project was added to our project of the database of CCS capture projects, and we're going to hear more about it today. But since October, even in the past 4 months or so, there have been some very impressive announcements coming out of Denmark. In December, the Danish government and several political parties reached an agreement to provide some more than 2 billion euros for the development and deployment of carbon capture, use and storage projects. This was following an earlier announcement in December where the government said that it was going to fund 2 carbon CO2 storage projects to the order of some 40 million euros. The Greenstand project, again, which we're going to hear a bit more about it today, a bit later on, and also the Bifrost project. Thirdly, I'd like to say that not that only CCS seems to have bipartisan support from a policy perspective, but it also enjoys strong public-private partnership as sort of a microcosm of that, as evidenced by the diversity of our speakers today. We have speakers from the government, from industry, both capture and storage, and also from academia as well. So, of course, this is not to say that it's all guaranteed to be smooth sailing. Indeed, today we're also going to address challenges, the hurdles that need to be overcome for successful deployment of CCUS in Denmark. Next, please. Today, we're joined by a diverse and very distinguished panel. A very warm welcome to Thor Iversen, joining us from the government of Denmark. Thor is the head of division in the Ministry of Climate, Energy and Utilities. Dr. Philip Fosbell, associate professor, Technical University of Denmark. Jacob Simonsen, managing director at ARC and founding member of C4 Copenhagen. Søren Reinhold Poulsen, project director for Project Greenstand from INEOS. With that, we'll begin with a few remarks from our speakers. I'll first turn it over to Thor to hear about the government's perspective, to hear about Denmark's Ministry of Climate, Energy and Utilities. Welcome, Thor. Over to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me on this discussion today. I'm very pleased to participate. I'm from the Ministry of Climate, working responsible for our efforts to promote CCS in Denmark. I put this in my front slide from 0 to 100 in 2 years, and that's just to illustrate that. Basically, 2 or 3 years ago, CCS was more or less nothing in the political landscape in Denmark. We were not really anybody working on it in the government, and we didn't have a position on it from the government side. Probably they were more or less against it. So we were basically starting from scratch 2 or 3 years ago. And we feel that we have reached 100 speeds per hour in these few years. So that's just the introduction. The reason why we have come to speed is, of course, that a lot of clever people has told us that it's necessary. The UN, IPCC, the EU have all stated that CCS is a necessity. We have an ambitious climate target in Denmark, 70% reduction in 2030. So that was part of the reason why CCS became one of our tools in the climate toolbox. And then, if you can skip the slide. We also had some actors who started becoming interested in CCS and started putting pressure on us and the government, saying, hey, what are you doing from the government side in promoting CCS? And one of these key players we have in the panel today. So as this map of Denmark shows, we have some quite big emitters in Denmark. They are located around the big city centers in Denmark. Some of them are waste management, some are oil refineries, some of cement production. But we have clusters in Denmark with large emissions where CCS is of relevance, and these emitters has also become active in the dialogue with the government, and that has also moved the political landscape a lot. When it comes to the potential for CCS in Denmark, the capture potential is up to 9 million tons per year in 2030 is our estimate right now. So there's a huge potential for CCS as a climate tool in Denmark. If you can skip the slide, please. Another reason why CCS has moved on in the forefront is that we have a huge potential for storage. I think our state geologists estimate that there is a potential for around 22 billion tons CO2 storage. So we have more room that we need, even if all our emitters use CCS and storage in Denmark. So CCS is not only relevant in a Danish context and for Danish emitters. Denmark is also relevant for international emitters when it comes to storage. There are concrete projects in oil fields in the North Sea. We are also looking into what opportunities there might be on onshore or near shore that perhaps has a bit more a bigger time frame than the offshore storage projects. But no matter what, we are pretty sure that we have room enough for a lot of CO2 in Denmark. You can skip the slide. What has happened on a political level since we started moving fast? Last summer, we made a political agreement, and it's important to state that it was a broad political agreement. It was from the far left to the center parties and to the far right parties. Almost all parties were included in these political agreements. So that just shows that even political parties that a few years ago were against CCS have now turned around and are willing to commit political to this toolbox. But our first political agreement last summer focused on storage, and it stated that it of course should be legal to store CO2 in Denmark, and it should be legal to import and export CO2 across national borders. Then in December, as was stated in the introduction, we made a second political agreement focusing on capture and transport. The big part of this agreement was how we are going to materialize our subsidy schemes for CCS. But we also have some other legal issues that needs to be cleared so CCS can become a reality in Denmark. And then, as I stated in number three dot, the political parties were quite clear that on a long-term basis, CCS hopefully should function on market terms in Denmark. We know it will be state subsidized for a while and that is necessary, but the political ambition is that CCS can move in a market direction. Then also just before Christmas and in the beginning of 2022, another political agreement was agreed upon. This one focused on PTX, and that is not storage, of course, but it is seen in the context of the value chain of capturing CO2, transportation of CO2, and then either storage and or utilization of CO2. So within less than a year, we have gained political support for the entire value chain, whether you choose to storage or utilize the CO2, and that's something we're quite proud of, and it helps us in our way forward. If you can skip the slides. Just a Short overview of our funding, CCS. We have two subsidy schemes, one with approximately 2.2 billion euros and a smaller one with 0.2 billion euros. All in all, we expect them to create reductions of 1.0 million tons CO2 by 2030. And these, in a Danish context, these are huge subsidy schemes. That's a lot of money in a Danish context. So that's also a reflection on how far and how long we have moved in a very short time span. A few lessons learned on what has happened the last couple of years. It makes a change. It makes a difference when the climate scientists, the UN, EU, etc., states that CCS is a necessity. It really makes a change politically. It has been a surprise for us when we first started moving on this. We were a bit afraid of, okay, is this going to be a divisive political issue in Denmark? It hasn't, at least not in Parliament, as I said before. And also, when we talk to municipalities, we see a lot of positive dialogue with them. We probably are going to experience some discussion of not in my backyard if we will try to create storage onshore, but for now it has actually been a surprise to us how positive the dialogue and supportive the dialogue have been from the municipalities. Yes, we are moving fast. Are we sometimes moving too fast? We don't know, but that makes the last dot even more important. When we are moving this fast, then we need close dialogue with the stakeholders. We need them to tell us when we are moving into the wrong direction and when we are hitting blind spots. So we are trying to keep as close a dialogue with all stakeholders as possible. I think that's just a few remarks from the minister's side on the Danish situation.
Thank you very much, Thor. Indeed, it's fascinating to hear about the fast movement and the sort of the political support, the fact that it's not seen as being divisive. And we've also got quite a few questions from the audience already about the public support, the public perception, and your comment about close dialogue with stakeholders. I think hopefully we'll revisit that in the discussion. But thank you. And could I now turn over to Jakob, please, to hear about the ARC project, how it came about and your perspectives. Jakob, over to you.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for the invitation to speak today. Yes, the big why are we actually embarking on this journey to capture CO2 at our waste to energy plant? The simple question is that waste to energy is a very good place to do carbon capture, and we cannot avoid to do carbon capture if we want to treat waste in the future. We are here not to produce energy, we are actually here to treat waste. So next slide, please. So even though you might think that we can make waste go away, I think it's safe to say that we are a society of junkies of consumption. We use all kinds of goods and services in our daily life, and that goods or service becomes waste at some point, and it is our role to see that we can mitigate the environmental and also the climate impact of waste. So that is basically why we are doing it. Next slide, please. And of course, this correlates very well with the IPCC recommendations and also their findings that the carbon capture and storage is very necessary in the way forward. Next one, please. So when we look at ARC, climate is a license to operate. I think it's very safe to say that waste to energy plants, maybe 20 years ago, they did not have dioxin filters. But we saw that our emissions of dioxins caused cancer and all other sorts of not so nice things. So it was regulated that all waste to energy plants had to have very efficient dioxin filters on their installations. And in my point of view, I think it is safe to say that we will not be able to treat waste in the future without being able to treat our emissions of CO2. So climate and carbon capture, storage or utilization will be a license to operate in the future. Please. We have made climate accounts in ARC. We have a goal to be a climate neutral or even a climate positive or climate negative, of course, waste to energy plant. We have many different kinds of waste management operations, but as you can see from this, energy on the far left bars are our main contribution to CO2 emissions. Next one, please. And we are, of course, very aware that we are living in a country and in a city that have very high climate ambitions. We have ambitions even for climate goals in 2025, that we need to limit our emissions to 50 to 54% of the emissions that we had in 1990. Maybe just 2 or 3 years ago, it was very progressive that Denmark said that we wanted to be carbon neutral in 2050. Now it's very mainstream, thanks for that. And it was also very ambitious that we had to reduce our emissions by 70% in 2030. It might still be progressive, but this is our definite goal, and we are, of course, doing all we can to meet this. Next one, please. And Copenhagen have embarked on this journey actually many years ago. Copenhagen is ARC's biggest owner, and you can take the next one, please. And in their roadmap of how they would like to see the emissions in Copenhagen develop, you can see that the roadmap, the newest one, is still missing about 500,000, a little less, 500,000 tons to be the first climate neutral city in the world. Next one, please. So when we at ARC, owned by the municipality of Copenhagen, they own the majority of us. We're not a shared company, but basically the same. We say that we have about 500,000 tons of CO2 potential that we can limit. Of course, the municipality of Copenhagen are very interested to make this happen. Of course, some of our emissions are fossil, other parts, 2/3 are biogenic. It is to the composition of the waste. It might change in the years to come. We might sort out more plastic, so the fossil part might be lower. We might also sort out some of the biogenic for biogasification, so that it might also be lower. But the point is that if we are able to fit our waste to energy plant with carbon capture, we are able to deliver significant lower CO2 emissions in our area. Next one, please. So what we have done is that we have embarked on a journey, so to speak, starting with a small pilot plant. And I know that Philip from DTU will come back and talk more about that, because it's had a very important role in that we're doing together with DTU, Penda and Ramble. We have had funding from the Danish state in the energy development program to first have a pilot plant, and from there we will move on to fit a small demonstration plant. And from there, hopefully, we will either get EU funding or we will get funding from the Danish CCS support scheme to build a full-scale carbon capture plant. And the aim is to have this up and running in the late 2025. I think before Thor, Iversen actually also said that there were some people pushing the Danish government, and I think I might be one of them, being impatient to say that we need this agenda to move forward. And thank you very much for the Danish government to listen and trying to move this in a very quick and very right direction. Next one, please. So if we look at the value chain, we have ARC, and we need intermediate storage at the harbor, which is very close to here. We need to order ships, and we need to have agreements with the storage operators to store our captured CO2 in the depleted oil fields in the North Sea or in the other fitted geological formations that are in Denmark. We could, of course, also use this for utilization, and that is another way to go. Next one, please. And to see, how can we actually get there? We are together with Sweden and Lithuania, actually the only ones in the ETS in Europe, but ETS will be a driver to push out our fossils emissions. And it is proposed that we will also see a CO2 tax coming, and that will actually be an economic driver to get rid of our CO2 fossil emissions. For the biogenic emissions, there might be introduced, hopefully there will be introduced a negative CO2 tax. Another driver for this will be the Danish CCS support scheme. Or in the end, we might also be able to sell offsets in the market. We are definitely looking for this. And to my last slide, please, is saying that there has been a proposal tabled by the government for green tax reform. It is a proposal that has to be negotiated in Parliament, but I think the interesting part is that compiling the CO2 tax and the ETS, it is seen that there's a significant subsidy, so to speak, or economic incentive to build carbon capture plants regarding the fossil element, and also actually for the biogenic part. And I think that will conclude my remarks for now. And maybe I should just also say that we have taken the initiative to cooperate with other big emitters in the greater Copenhagen area. We have been able to put together a small forum called Carbon Capture Cluster Copenhagen, and our aim is here to combine our chimneys in capture activities, aiming at capturing nearly 3 million tons by 2030. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that, Jakob. It's very comprehensive. Clearly, ARC is a visionary project, but what kind of struck me was your comment about it will be employing CCS in waste to energy is a sort of license to operate issue, or will become a license to operate issue. So that's really kind of like, clearly central to your thinking. So with that, may I turn to Søren, please? So we heard about the capture side. So coming to the storage part of the value chain, Søren, can you hear a little bit about Project Greenstand?
Yeah, thank you for the invitation, and look forward to fast speed a bit on the Project Greenstand. So you will not get a lot of details, but I think I can provide you with a good overview in 10 minutes time. So Project Greenstand is not the only CCS project in the Danish CCS bus. There's also another project called Bifrost. It's also offshore, using old depleted oil reservoirs that are coming to a commercial end. And then related to Thor's talk about the potential in Denmark, then of course further back in the bus, there's the nearshore and the onshore opportunities as well from a storage point of view. We've been around for more than 2 decades operating those infrastructure you can see and the fields below it. You can see on the right map here. So we know a lot about running the infrastructure, operating it on a day-to-day basis. We know how our reservoirs with oil and gas, how they produce, and we also know how they react when they're subjected to injection, i.e. the same process they are going to experience when we inject the liquid CO2. Having said that, we are of course humble to the challenge. CO2 is new thing for us. Liquid CO2 at high pressures and low temperatures going into the reservoirs, that's something new for us. So that entails a lot of detailed maturation work, and that's what we are doing these days. We are focusing on one particular area to build a strong and robust concept for CO2 storage, both commercially and technically. And then also we are looking into the transportation part of the CCS value chain. So it's not only storage, it's also transportation that we are doing. We are not, INEOS is not a shipping company, but we envisage that we will enter into some kind of commercial consortium with a shipping company that wants to be part of the CCS journey and build dedicated CO2 carrier ships. So right now we have completed what we call phase 1. That's desktop work and also lab work, a lot of study works and so on. And now we are into what we call phase 2. That is going offshore and trying to see what happens to. Can you go back again to the same slide? Yes, thank you. We're trying to see what happens when CO2 in a limited amount are injected into a particular reservoir. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this is phase 2. Sorry for speed talking here, but basically you can see the cartoon here. We're taking already available liquid CO2 from one of our factories on the European mainland in Belgium, Antwerp. We are putting it into isotank containers, and then we are loading it onto a ship that will go all the way up to the injection site on the Nini reservoir. The CO2 will be brought on top of a jack-up rig standing next to the unmanned satellite platform, and there it will be pumped into the reservoir at the required pressure and the required temperatures. And if you see at the last cartoon, you can see how the CO2 plume develops in the reservoir. This is a very cartoonish drawing here, and there's a lot of details, of course, that needs to be illustrated in order to describe it. But basically, we are trying to do a mini test of the value chain. Of course, the full-scale project entails a different concept. I'll come back to that on the next slide. We are a bunch of companies working on this project. It's supported by the government. They are supporting 40% of the total cost of the project. And then we are getting project management support from a cluster organization called Energy Cluster Denmark. You can see on the pie chart there's a lot of companies involved. This is both national and international companies that are participating. They are not here just for the fun of it. They are here because they believe in a big future, in a potential big business opportunity in the CCS value chain. So they have a skin in the game, not only because they have pulled money out of their pockets, but also because they need to deploy man hours and external costs into the project. Lo and behold, we hope to be able to inject at the end of 22, and then we'll do that for around 3 months, learn from the injection and the deployment of various technologies, and boil it into what we call the full-scale project. And this is what you see illustrated in the green bar in the timescale plot. So already from this start this year, we are already in parallel working on a full-scale project, in addition to doing the pilot test offshore. A big task, but also something we see as a necessity in order to meet our ambitious climate goals in Denmark, if we are going to be a storage provider for Danish CO2 in the future. So first stage, full scale, 1.5 metric tons per annum, but then we have larger ambitions. We will look at all our reservoirs and potentially also the underlying saline aquifers, so we can build a capacity up to 8 million tons per year by 2030. That entails, of course, that we have customers in the shop. So we have a very hectic dialogue ongoing with all the potential emitters, not only in Denmark, primarily in Denmark, but also on the European mainland and in countries like Sweden and Finland. Next slide, please. So just a few pictures. The middle one showing the travel distance from Antwerp, where the liquid CO2 will be picked up, and all the way to the Nini site, i.e. the Nini reservoir, which has by the commercial time in 25 will be abandoned and only be used for CO2 storage. So this is not an enhanced oil recovery project, it's a true green project. The other picture shows the elements of the pilot trial. So you can see the boat here, there will go 40 containers on it, each with 20 metric tons in it. So it's 800 tons per travel, and we'll inject around 12,000 tons of CO2. So it's up to 14 times back and forth. 3 months it will take, and we of course look forward to getting to know all the results so we can get a bit wiser on what it takes to handle CO2, but also inject CO2. Next slide, please. And the final slide here is on the Fullscale project that I already talked a bit to. So you can see what is different in terms of the concept that I just talked to, the pilot project. That is, we are replacing those ISO tanks with a limited amount of CO2. And instead we are building, together with a dedicated shipping company, we are building big, huge CO2 carrier ships, all the way from 7,500 cubic meters to up to 50,000 cubic meters. We haven't locked us in on a particular design yet, but it means that we are quite busy, and at the end of 23, i.e. next year, we will actually have to have a final investment decision in order to meet our target of being able to provide storage in the end of 25. Once we have proved this concept on the West and in the main, we'll of course have a proven concept which we can replicate and scale up and harvest the economies of scale in terms of timing and cost. Very quickly talking here, guys, there's a lot of more to be said, but that was my quick speech in order to be able to manage all the questions that are coming in, as I can see. Thank you.
Yes, indeed. Thanks very much, Soren. And I think it's just really impressive that you're progressing both the pilot and the full-scale project simultaneously. I mean, we just talked about the momentum and what's been happening on the policy front, as Thor said, 100 kilometers in sort of like 2 years, but also clearly it's sort of lots of momentum on the project itself, the Greenstand project. And also I was very impressed about the 23 companies in the consortium and how they're looking at this as not only a climate mitigation opportunity, but also a big commercial opportunity as well. So kind of that's clearly driving one of the drivers of the momentum there too. So thank you for that. As you said, we're having a lot of questions, but before that, could I please ask Philip to come and give us a perspective about from the DTU, and clearly who's been involved very closely in the project, some of the project developments and policy developments in Denmark as well. Over to you, Philip.
Thank you very much, Gloria. So let me just start out saying that I'm Philip, being in the CCS business for small 20 years, so I know a few bit of the details and the whole technical aspects. And I would say that you know, I was used to say that I was a one-man army, but that kind of changed over the years. So if anybody want to join in trying to develop new great technology, please throw me an email or try to apply for the positions we have available. Let's next slide. So the way we develop research at DTU is that we go for the whole feed chain of TRL. So this means from low basic science implementation up to basically full-scale pilots and demos. So we combine measurements in the lab, we do thermodynamic modeling, we apply that in process simulations, both steady state and rate-based simulations, and I will also use that to predict performance of pilots. And I can honestly admit that the last few years has been a lot of pilot work. Let's just take next slide. So over the years, we've been involved with quite a significant amount of projects. Most of them is actually locally funded Danish projects. I will just pick on 2 of these projects called the BioCo2 Project and of course the collaboration with Jakob before. Let's just take next slide. The BioCo2 Project is a biogas operating project where we can capture up to 1 ton per day of CO2. This is constructed by Pendair Denmark and in Fredericia. And you can see how we can actually put that on a truck and transport it across the country. It took approximately 2 hours to disassemble it and put it in a truck. We just continue a bit with the slides, and you can see how we install it on our biogas plant, actually fairly close to the university. Just continue. And this is the final assembly of the unit. So we've expanded and also have a new pilot, which is currently installed at Amager Resource Center under the ski hill in Copenhagen, the only ski hill. So if you take next slide, we can see how we took it through one of the main doors. Up in the top right corner, you can see that is the ski hill. It's not white, it's actually green. We put it through one of the big ports down on the ground, and if you take next slide, you can see how we erected it inside the building. And take next slide, and we also raised the towers in there. We have 2 containers that was fitted in there, and this is the final installation. It took 6-7 hours to do the installation. That's fairly quick. Of course, the commissioning also took a month afterwards, but that was a quick job. So let's just take next slide. Some of the results we came out the last few months. This is, I think, an interesting aspect that we've been able to reduce energy consumption. And I would admit that we have not implemented all our ideas in the resource yet. So this means that there is still a good amount of resource still to be produced. And my hope is that we will time also be able to reduce the energy consumption even further. So people that know the technical aspects will know that this is a fairly good performance that we're looking at here. So let's go to the next slide. So we also are doing other projects, not only in collaboration with Jakob at ARC. One of the projects is, of course, also in collaboration with Pendair, but this is a project where we convert biogas into methanol. So it's basically taking CO2 into a value-added product. In this case, it's the energy from the conversion comes from the biogas itself because it's mainly methane and CO2. But we can also put this container, if you take next slide, into another gear where we can take hydrogen and CO2, and we will also test that within the next coming 1.5 years. And the container looks like this. If you take next slide, you will have a quick look at that. But that's what it looked like a few months ago. Next slide. So what happens in Denmark now is that the government has set a fairly ambitious target to reduce emissions over the next coming 7-8 years to get to a target of approximately 30 MTPA in Denmark. And on top of that, there can be like a portfolio of CCS projects. My hope is that they will be implemented soon. There's a slight hesitation. The expectation is to start 25, but it's probably realistic 26, I can see now. And so this is basically the net emissions. That's of course the difference between those two curves. We can take next again. So there's a potential in Denmark to import CO2 from other countries. There's also potential to use direct air capture. And now I just put it as a fairly big amount of CCS in Denmark. I think the government is looking for up to 40 MTPA. So next slide. So this means that just like other countries around Denmark, we can see a business potential for importing and for storing, and also gaining back some of the, you could say, issues we have created for climate over the years, because Denmark is an oil-producing country. So CCU is, of course, an aspect in this game, and it shows like there is a potential for CCU in Denmark. Copenhagen Airport has been like consuming in the order of what would be equivalent to 3.5 million tons of CO2. But overall, there's not a lot of CO2 in Denmark. There is a huge potential for CCU in Denmark. And that's because right now the government is looking at a fairly ambitious P2X strategy. So a lot of this CO2 could be used. So this is also a potential for export. So this means export of components coming out of the conversion of CO2. And if you take next slide. So of course, this is the real imported amount. And let's just take next slide. So there's a lot of paradoxes in Denmark. The fact is that if you just look like 1 year back, so I'm not going to go through all the topics in this 10 bulleted list, but we just say that there's been a lot of you could say problematic issues in why CCS is not happening in Denmark. It is happening now. If you take next slide, you would see that this 3 dots on the top there, those were, I would say, things preventing Denmark from doing CCS. So this means they're basically illegal to do it. And now that changed, right? But still, the waste incineration plants, are they really allowed to do this in reality? Are they allowed to take funding from their users to run the plants? I'm not sure that question has been answered, right? And if we want to convert all this CO2, I can just say honestly, it will need some sort of support structure because it's extremely expensive to do this. There is right now still remaining some sort of missing market pull-push mechanism. It's kind of the chicken and egg issue, right? So who starts out, the producers or the consumers of CO2 or the storage sites of the CO2? And one of the things that is very much in focus in Denmark these days is the cement production. So what is the incentives for the cement industry to do this if they will go into a market where the cement will be twice as expensive compared to other competitors in the market? So still, you know, the government has set aside a funding scheme for that will reduce the emissions by, let's say, 1 million ton per year. The potential is maybe like 4 to 9. The overall arching potential, as I showed before, could be much, much bigger. But I do see the government, I do see stakeholders in the industry needing to man up in order to reach this very ambitious target. So we're not there yet. I don't just say that very clearly. Next slide. And I think that just summarizes my overall points. Thanks a lot.
Thanks very much, Philip. Much appreciated. And thanks for that sort of the photographic the journey through the installment of the project, and also this last slide of what you've sort of optimistically called paradoxical CO2 issues. Obviously, there are a number of challenges that need to be overcome, even in a place like Denmark, which has shown great progress, I think, over the past sort of couple of years. As Thor said, still a number of kind of regulatory and legal, perhaps, barriers, and of course, commercial barriers that need to be resolved. But could I now invite all of our speakers to come on? And we've had a lot of questions from the audience, in fact, and I've been trying to sort of go through them as you were talking to and combine with some of the questions that I had. So perhaps kind of like, I'll just try to sort of group them, the questions from the audience, and pose them to you. I'll try to perhaps sort of, you know, pick speakers, but please feel free to jump in as well. One of the kind of most recurring kind of themes in the questions was about, and something that we've discussed, was about public perception of CCS. There's been a recognition that, and as Thor mentioned, and perhaps this is a sort of question to start with Thor, that the policy support and the understanding has sort of progressed very rapidly. Sort of what are lessons learned? And some sort of members of the audience have remarked that the science is out there, the IPCC report is out there, but this sort of embrace hasn't necessarily happened in every other country. So what is driving that sort of leaning forward to CCS in Denmark at the policy level, at the policymaker level, but also has the public perception changed at all in your view in terms of CCS?
To start, I mean, we have, from the government side, we haven't made any scientific investigation into the public approach to this, but it is our impression. I can use our minister as an example. Him not as a politician, but also as a person. He says it himself. He used to be against CCS. And IPCC, the UN, the EU, all these recommendations, they have made him change his mind. So it's what I stated in my slides. It makes a difference when the scientists come with such clear recommendations. I saw one of the questions focusing on NGOs. I mean, it is our impression that some Danish NGOs have also become supportive, not all of them, and some are quite hostile, but just that some NGOs have become supportive is a surprise to us. So it's maybe it's an indication of that there is some kind of depth in the change of attitude to this. I don't think it's only on political level. I also think it's on a broader level. And at least when things have changed on political level, that is quite often the starting point for broader change in the public attitude. So.
Thank you. And I saw that both Jakob and Søren wanted to come in on this one. So Jakob, perhaps if I can start with you.
Yes, I think the public perception is very much a function of it is clear to quite a lot of people that this really needs to be done. But that is not to be said that we also think that wind turbines are good, but nobody wants them in their backyard, right? And I think it's a little bit of the same discussion. I see the same as Thor, that some of our NGOs are speaking out in favor of CCS, and they did not do that a few years ago. So there is a change, and I think public perception. You need to dissect this into what are the public perception of storing CO2 onshore, near shore, or offshore. Offshore, I don't think it's a huge problem. Nearshore, a lesser problem. Onshore, a potential problem. And we need to focus on this.
Thank you very much, Jakob. And I saw Philip was smiling too, but I can maybe come back to that. But obviously in the questions also, we saw some questions about onshore storage. Where is the country in terms of the process and not just, from a regulatory environment point of view as well. But Søren, I'll come to you.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that clearly the public is on our stakeholder maps. Absolutely, and as I told you before, we are in phase 2, but in phase 1 we actually develop a public communication strategy, and this is what we are executing in phase 2. And in a week's time we will launch a new website for the Greenstand project, and it will be focused on the public, i.e., people who don't have any insight into CCS. But going into the website, they can get a very good grasp on the full value chain, and especially the storage part. So this has focused us, and we're spending money on it. We're having a professional communication company involved in phase 2 as part of the 23 companies I talked about.
I think that's really important, because as Jakob said, and as we're seeing, kind of it's big in infrastructure projects wherever kind of is important. The stakeholder engagement is crucial, and for particularly kind of, I think CCUS, we're finding that as well. One question before we maybe go to Philip, Søren, was a number of people in the audience are asking about EOR. So you mentioned that in the pilot phase, it's kind of going into the reservoir, but are you looking at EOR for next phases of Greenstand?
Yeah, it's a big no.
Okay.
So once we turn into CO2 storage service, it's only CO2 storage service. So no more oil being produced from those reservoirs. And it happens so that Siri and the fields out there, they're at the brink of being uneconomical at this point in time already. So of course, if there's a high oil price, we will continue a bit more. But they are planned to be closed for oil and gas production, and then used solely for CO2, if we do have a viable concept in terms of the CO2 storage.
Okay, thank you. And can
I just add to that, maybe?
Please.
that our project is very much a climate project. So of course we cannot capture the CO2 and then make enhanced oil recovery. We would be no better off. So a very clear definition for us is that if we catch the CO2 and want to storage in the depleted oil fields, it shall not be used for enhanced oil recovery.
So I think we're sort of already getting from a probably from public perception as well. Offshore, clear. Onshore, perhaps more difficult. Enhanced oil recovery, let's not go there. Thor, a question from the audience was also just a sort of clarification point, but I think you mentioned that the estimate is for 22 billion tons of CO2 storage, potentially cumulatively in Denmark, isn't it? For the sort of, does that include saline formations as well, saline aquifers as well? Do you know the?
Actually, I cannot answer that question. I'm not that much an expert.
But I can too.
Yeah, okay.
It does include saline aquifers. It does.
Okay.
Okay, that's appreciated, Søren. Philip, if I can come back to you, were smiling when we're talking about public perception, but I think I found your final slide fascinating in terms of some of the sort of the challenges ahead. Would you be able to speak, I mean, about public acceptance, but perhaps also about some of the sort of regulatory and commercial barriers? I mean, some of the members of the audience have asked questions, for example, around the London Protocol. We heard that there may be potential for importation, exportation of CO2. I mean, that's obviously one of the challenges, what's being done about that. You mentioned sort of offshore permitting issues. Could you talk a little bit about sort of challenges that you foresee a little bit more, and perhaps if you have any observations about public perceptions of CCS?
Sure. Let me just underline exactly what the other speaker said. Denmark is using CO2 to save the climate, full stop. So this means that whatever was in the game 10, 15 years ago, Denmark was pursuing a track of using CCS in some sort of fossil fuel application. That is not on the table at all. And I would actually say that the philosophy in Denmark is to use as little CCS as possible and change the, you could say, the societal infrastructure, going from fossil fuel cars to electrical cars and all of the other changes that have to happen very soon. And then when everything has changed, then fossil fuel, and all the fossil fuels have gone, then CCS is the tool that will come in and do the last bit of the game. And it has to be done in a similar strategy that has also been done in Denmark for wind turbines. One of the problematic issues for wind turbines in Denmark is that, you know, people really, really like them, but they really don't want them in their backyard. It's a bit the same with CCS. People really want to have a nice climate, but they really don't want to have installations in their backyard. So this means that there is a fairly positive, you could say, perception of having CCS and climate initiatives in Denmark, but it should be in a way that it doesn't, you could say, get close to people. So I think it's a very important statement in saying that CCS is a requirement to have a nice climate. There could be a discussion in certain forums in Denmark saying that CCS is an issue, but let me just say clearly to everybody, and I think everybody around the table also knows today, that if we don't choose a climate mitigating strategy, planting trees, doing pyrolysis, having CCS, and also eventually direct air capture to have negative emissions, we will just have an extremely bad climate. That's how it is. So this is also why the politicians have seen that recently. And so they've moved from a scenario where people like have realized that CCS was just like something that has something to do with fossil fuel, into a scenario where now it's actually the solution to having a reasonable climate. Because when I say reasonable climate, we're not talking about an okay climate or something that we have today. We're talking about something that is worse than we have today, but is acceptably worse, but not catastrophic in some way. And then we're also talking about the export issue. I did see a few questions coming up in terms of export. I had one line in my last slide saying that it's not feasible to export any type of fuel. And that's because the subsidy scheme in Denmark is set up in such a way, I guess, and for many other countries too, is that you support you could say, the green technology. But as soon as the fuel comes out of the market, it's going to compete with other similar fuels with the same fossil price, you could say, in other markets. And you're not allowed to substitute twice. You cannot substitute for creating the fuel and then suddenly substitute again for selling it on green terms. That's impossible in Denmark. So that's why we have this issue that, well, how do you create a competitive infrastructure around many of these green alternatives? Because I say alternatives right now, but in the future, they will actually be something better than what we have today. I think sometimes we hear often this, that people have to stop this and stop that and not do this or whatever. It's not about that, actually. It's about doing it a better way, chasing it so you make sure that society does it in a much more efficient and proactive way, rather than just sticking to the old way of doing it, which is inefficient. You could just see the electrical cars, right? It is a really nice example. You can see how we went away from coal combustion into having photovoltaics applications. There's nothing to do with CCS, but it's basically the same, right? we had an issue before that we were polluting the atmosphere. The better situation is not doing it, right? But there has to be an economic infrastructure around it. Maybe that gave you kind of an outline of the political game in Denmark.
That's much appreciated. I know we're kind of coming to the end of, actually we just sort of 1 minute past, but I wanted to, and there have been sort of some amazing questions, just try to sort of wrap them up. We should have had a longer webinar, but any final words from anybody before I bring this to a close from any of our speakers? Thor, perhaps.
If we can just confirm, EUR is completely off the table. We would lose all political support if we moved in that direction. And just one point I didn't mention in my presentation, but in our political agreements, it was actually a focus point that there's a political ambition that Denmark should become some kind of international hub for CCS and for storage. So that's also an element of our political agreements.
And also, I believe I'll come to you, Jakob, in a second. I think there's also obviously the kind of the desire to stop all exploration and production of new licenses by 2050, etc. So kind of clearly there's a lot more that's going on, sort of, it not, you know, obviously outside of the CCS space, in the kind of energy space, in the Danish climate agreement. But I think it was very worth your emphasizing your point, because we got a lot of questions. Jakob, over to you.
It is just to say, you know, how do we actually make this becoming a full-scale success? And I think a lot of it is to mitigate risk, because all of us around the table, I know Søren and especially as well, you know, we are looking to, someday we'll have to stand in front of our boards taking final investment decisions, and it is billions of euros that is on the stake. So I think for us to be able to move hand in hand, how to see to mitigate this risk will become key. And then it's just to end with the government as well. It's we're very thankful that they are trying to reach out and help us with the support schemes, but we need to mitigate some of the regulatory risk in order to get there, because it is still illegal or it can be questioned whether a municipal company like ARC is actually, it's a part of our task to catch the CO2 in the stack. And of course, we need to get rid of these kind of uncertainties, and better today than tomorrow.
Agreed. And I think that applies to CCS industry as a whole, that we need to overcome and bring clarity on the legal and regulatory aspects kind of globally in different jurisdictions. But well, thank you very much. This has been a very fascinating, very interesting webinar. On behalf of the Institute, I would like to thank our audience for attending today. And also, of course, once again, thanks to our speakers for taking part and sharing your insights. As I mentioned, our Emerging CCS Markets series will be ongoing every month until May. So please do check our website for more details. The next one will focus on Southeast Asia, Malaysia, and Indonesia. You can download our global status of CCS report from our website. And if you have further questions, please reach us out at info@globalccsinstitute.com. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. Have a good day, and bye for now.